There was a time many years ago where I was at an event, and I remember sitting around a campfire and we were singing songs and telling stories. And a guy came up and he told me a story. I'm going to see if I can remember it. All I remember of those first days was the red dust. It wasn't sandy, it wasn't gritty, it was like powder. And as our millions of feet trumped, it jumped up in the air and it spread around us a cloud, a locust, and it covered us and made us all red. And we marched. A red snake that marched across the desert, and the sun beat down at us, ripped at us, tore at us, chewed on us. And every day, the night would come and we would just drop where we were. Stand up again at the first touch, at the first prod, at the first cattling zap of its heat. We would stand up and march forward until one day we could see it. The wall. The wall. The wall spread out in all directions. Huge red bricks as far as the eye could see in every direction. And we didn't realize how big we were until we could see ourselves crashing against it like an ocean. There was not millions of us. There were not billions of us. There was an eternity of us spread out to all sides. And we hit this wall as a wave, as an elemental force, and we broke against it. Now the last miles, endless time, we were not walking on ground. We were walking on those at the beginning of the wave who had fallen and been pushed back. And as we approached, I remembered the anger I had. Why aren't you going through it? Why aren't you on the other side of it? How can we be denied? And I found myself tearing at the people in front of me, ripping at their backs, even as the people behind me tore shreds of skin off of my shoulder blades. And I bled and I screamed, and suddenly I wasn't doing anything but riding on the waves. Terrible and red, mixed with the sand, with the shit, with us, until eventually I pressed up against the wall and found it wouldn't move. And the tide bore me away, drug me, bloody smeared across the wall, down the pile of bodies, until one day I awoke, standing again on my own 2 feet in the red sand, staring at the mound of people, the waves of people rolling against the wall, breaking against it, and shattering it against it. And I found I was not dead, but was simply adrift and could do nothing. So I started walking. I chose a direction away from the people, away from the wall and the booming sound of humanity, until eventually myself and the handful of people who had absent-mindedly wandered the same direction as I found places far away where we could hear the people as if it meant something to still belong to that thing that had tried to grind me against the wall. And there I started. With one finger, I would trace the mortar on the bricks over and over and over and over and over and over, my OCD playing out in a square. And I would talk to myself as I did it, and very slowly, over the time, the mortar started to crumble under my fingers. And eventually my fingers started to crumble under the mortar and my fingers became one, until eventually it was bone scraping against this mortar. But I found that if I did it long enough, unlike the booming mass of mankind, I had progress. It cost. I wore that finger down to the point where I couldn't stick the nub in far enough to reach it. But eventually, other fingers found their way, and I was able one day to pull that first brick out. And I had a hole. And I spent the next lifetime in that hole, while outside the mass of humanity continued to slam against the wall. I no longer heard it as an audible sound. What I did is I felt it through the hands which I used in the darkness to scrape away the mortar on the next brick on the inside. And then, with what was left of my fingers, to pull it inch by bloody inch out of the wall and drop it behind me. And I had grown so skinny. I had grown so thin. I had grown so skeletal. I had nothing left but my digging tools attached to the shoulders. And I pulled them in the square, the rectangle, and I felt the mortar move and give beneath me. But at the same time, I felt myself giving into the wall, losing into the wall, becoming the wall, because nothing could defeat this wall, but I had to try. So I found myself one day realizing I was going to fail. And I couldn't stop. Everything had become automatic at that point. The pain had disappeared, the blood had disappeared, I had disappeared, the wall had disappeared. And as I felt the last gasps of my lungs, I pushed on the brick and it moved. It gave way before me, and as I died, I touched snow.